Denise Langley, and I would like you all to stand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Get started. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to just go through the introductions and how we're going to run the meeting. The Goffstown Zoning Board is an elected board of 5 members and up to 5 alternates appointed by the Zoning Board. Currently, the board has 5 elected members and four alternates. If anyone is interested in serving on the ZBA, please contact the Planning Zoning Office at Town Hall for more information. The board has a posted agenda for each meeting and intends to follow the items in order. The board will open the public hearing on an application to receive testimony from applicants, abutters, and affected parties, and ask questions about the appeal. The public hearing will then be closed, and the board will enter into a deliberative session to discuss the merits of the appeal. For each application, the board will decide to approve with conditions, deny, or continue the public hearing to a later meeting. You are welcome to watch the deliberations this evening, or you can call the zoning department at 603-497-8990, extension 815, to get results. For an applicant's request to be approved, there must be an affirmative vote of at least 3 members. An applicant can request a continuance if there is not a full 5-member board. We will be all set this evening. If you, the applicant, and abutter any party to the action are aggrieved by a decision made by the ZBA tonight, you have the right to appeal to Superior Court or the New Hampshire Housing Appeals Board. However, before appealing, you must request a hearing within this board to preserve your right to appeal. Rehearing request must be filed within 30 days of the decision and state all reasons why the decision was unlawful or unreasonable. Failure to request a rehearing may forfeit your ability to appeal. Okay, we'll start with introductions. We'll start this way.
Derek Horn, Town Administrator.
Davis Allen, alternate.
Bruce Buttrick, Member.
Jason Cody, Vice Chairman.
Denise Langley, Chair.
Kristen Dawes, alternate.
John Belleville, member.
Okay, great. Let's get started. We will discuss the minutes, and for this, we are going to put Davis as a voting member for the minutes. Any comments, changes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Any comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
I was not at this meeting, but I did review it and watch the video, so I am also going to say aye. Any opposed, abstaining? Motion carries. And Davis was the alternate, the voting member on this, for the record. Okay. Let me just pull my stuff about. Okay, the first hearing this evening is ZAK LLC, applicant, in 553 Mass Road LLC, owners, are seeking a variance to allow for a dog daycare business that will have a long-term and overnight boarding as part of a commercial kennel business. The variance is required per section 3.11D7, Table of Principal Uses of the Goffstown zoning ordinance, as the proposed commercial kennel use is not permitted within the commercial zone. The property is located at 553 Mass Road, the Goffstown Plaza, map 18, lot 58B, zoned commercial. Who will be representing this case? Can come right up.
A motion for no regional impact.
Thank you. All,
Second.
okay, anybody opposing? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, no regional impact.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board. My name is Brad Westgate. I'm a lawyer with Wells White and Fontaine in Nashua, and I represent the applicant ZAK LLC or ZAK LLC. With me is Scott and Rachel Valancourt, who are the owners of the applicant. May I use one of the other chairs for Mrs. Valencourt to sit with us, Madam
You
Chair?
certainly may. And now that I see you on the other side of the table, I am going to be recusing myself of this case as well. Sorry.
So recused.
I am out of here, yeah. I'm, yeah.
All right, folks.
You can swing over a little more.
So-
I'll give you a break.
To just continue on that, then both of our alternates will be voting tonight.
If I may sit, thank you.
Yes, yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, if I may address you that way.
Just for clarification, did you do the vote for regional impact, no regional impact?
Yeah.
We
And
did.
Denise was a
Yeah,
part of
so
that
I'll
vote?
do it again.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, if you could redo that, that'd be great.
So I made the original motion for no regional impact. John seconded. Now both alternates will be voting. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Sir?
Thank you very much again. My name is Brad Westgate, as mentioned, and Scott and Rachel Valencourt are with me at the table. Mr. and Mrs. Valencourt are residents of Goffstown for information purposes. So the board's aware this is an application for a variance to effectively allow overnight boarding of dogs as a core component of the Valencourt's proposed dog daycare and boarding business. Mr. Valencourt and my colleague at our law firm, Israel Pedra, have been working with the technical review committee and also with the town staff regarding the details of this application. That led to Mr. Shepherd, building inspector, writing to Attorney Pedra last June, about 4 weeks ago, advising that the overnight boarding and long-term boarding component was not permitted in the commercial district. So that's what brings us here tonight, not the basic daycare or dog care element of the application, which is a permitted use in the commercial district, but it's the overnight boarding component that's the need for the variance. So as noted at the beginning of the meeting, of course, the proposed area for space for this is a suite in Goffstown Plaza at 553 Mass Road. Goffstown Plaza, of course, is in the commercial district. And if all comes together for our application, and we also know that the planning board site plan approval process is going to be in effect in this application, so we'd be fortunate enough to get there. We'll have to go and deal with the planning board on questions they may have on site plan. But we would, if everything does come together, the plan is to rent about 5,400 square feet of space in the plaza, sort of right next to where the Verizon space is right now, right adjacent to that. I think as you look at it to the right. But also fence off a 40 by 55 foot area right behind the space for a sort of outdoor play area, if you will, that I'll detail a little more in a few moments. So the idea of the lease would be that indoor space primarily with the outdoor fenced-in area. I think fundamental to the application is the sort of nature of what a dog care facility is today versus the idea of what we might traditionally think of as a kennel. And that, to me, sort of underlies the basic rationale for why we're here this evening. I think years back, and perhaps the time the notion of a kennel was imported and became part of any zoning ordinance, you're thinking more of an operation that's a little more open, less fully staffed, organized, not haphazard, I don't mean that, but sort of more country-based, if you will. Today, and that I think probably was in tune with how pets were thought of in those days, and perhaps that's changed. People tell me that, maybe your own experiences, that pets have more of a sort of integrated component in a family. I don't want to go quite as far as saying a family member. I think that's, I don't know if it does disservice to anybody, but it's perhaps a little dramatic. But it's clear that pet owners, dog owners in particular, want to have familiarity and confidence with the people that they deal with who are taking care of their pets. And so a facility like this kind of needs this integrated component of both the daycare piece and the overnight boarding piece, because the pet owner is going to be become familiar with any facility like this, any shop like this, in the daycare setting initially. and they're gonna wanna have some familiarity and confidence with the people they deal with on an overnight boarding circumstance. So I think what I'm suggesting a bit is that the commercial district, by allowing the daycare, grooming, and trainer use, which is, I think those are the exact words that are used, animal daycare, groomer, trainer, doesn't integrate the boarding component overnight, but that's perhaps because it's not quite consistent or coincidental with how the marketplace really works today and what's expected. A little more details about this property. Of course, you folks are far more familiar with Goffstown Plaza than I. It sits on almost 17 acres of land. There's about 180,000 square feet of space. It's a variety of businesses, as you know, including Planet Fitness, Mountain-Based Brewery, the Trampoline Park, Advanced Auto, I think Dollar Store as well. As I mentioned, the plan for this proposal is the 5,400 or so square foot suite, the 40 by 50 foot area, 55 foot area in the back, which would be fenced in, and give you a little more detail of that. Our proposal would be to have a solid 6-foot fence, at least, perhaps 8 foot if the necessary permit could be obtained, to fully fence in that area. And the idea of the area is to be a sort of day play area. The dogs exercise, get out and play. The notion is not to have all the dogs that are held during daycare out at the same time, but to go out in groups. The approach that the Valancourts are taking is to franchise this as a so-called Playful Pack franchise. This is a national franchise that has operations in other states. And the Valancourts pick that because they get some expertise and experience from that franchisor, and get a good sense of how to set up the operation in that manner. The shop would open and stay open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, fully staffed all 24 hours, including overnight, which is not necessarily the case with all boarding operations. The daycare operations would go from typically about 6:30 in the morning to 7:30 p.m. And once the Valancourts have gotten going and they've got a solid track record developed, they're hoping to have in the order of 30 to 40 dogs during the daycare hours on average during each week, that sort of daily basis, but a significantly smaller number of that would be boarded overnight. During the day, of course, as I mentioned, dogs would be brought out in groups to play and exercise and all, but at night the dogs would stay inside. Outside of the daycare areas, the dogs would be inside. They would only go outside if need be to, as I might delicately put it, do their duty, but for no other purpose. There's not a play session, exercise session outside, not a group session outside at night, only for the purposes that I mentioned. Inside, the dogs would have, there would be secured berths, if you will, pens, varying sizes, so that there's a controlled environment during the overnight time frame for boarding. And even that can be used during the day if need be, if a particular dog needs a timeout, for example. And again, as I mentioned, there'd be at least one staff person on site during the overnight time frame. The Playpack franchisor uses the term condos for the units, berths that the dogs are put in. I apologize to condominium owners for the use of that term, but if you use it again tonight, you'll finally understand why I've stated it. So again, as I mentioned, if we're fortunate enough to be successful this evening, we understand we've got to commence the process with the planning board for site plan approval. And I think at that point is where a number of the project and operational details, because that's traditionally part of planning board processes, get dealt with. A couple more points regarding the outdoor play area, and then, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just try to address our summary analysis of the 5 points for the granting of a variance. So again, for the outdoor play area, again, fenced in about 40 by 55 feet. Right now, the The area behind the shopping center, as you all well know, is essentially concrete or paved up to a sort of embankment that heads up towards the very edge of the plaza. The idea would be to take up that concrete or pavement and put down several inches of gravel to have some permeability, and then have an artificial surface placed over that gravel, and then that's what's fenced in. So you've got a much more functional play area for the dogs on that basis, not a sort of concrete or asphalt location. Relative to the 5 criteria for the granting of a variance, Mr. Chairman, as the board is well aware, the first criteria is that the requested variance not be contrary to the public interest. We would respectfully submit it's not contrary to the public interest to grant a variance to allow overnight boarding as a component of a dog daycare facility when all other aspects of the proposed facility fall within the permitted use in the commercial district, namely animal daycare, groomer, trainer, permitted use. This is especially true, we would submit, that when the overnight boarding component is inside the facility. It's not an outside component. Secondly, I think it's important to note that we're in a commercial district. We're not seeking to put seeking a variance to allow overnight boarding or a dog daycare facility in a residential zone. This is a commercial district in a long-standing developed commercial shopping center. It's particularly noteworthy, I think, to take a look at one section of your zoning ordinance. It's section 2-3.8. And that's the section that sets forth the purposes of the commercial district. And among those purposes is the following, and I'll quote it. It's one of the purposes to encourage, quote, commercial and service uses to the mutual advantage of both consumers and merchants, thus promoting public convenience and prosperity. So again, encourage commercial and service uses to the mutual advantage of both consumers and merchants. And as I was thinking through this application and reading the zoning ordinance, that struck me that that's effectively what's happening here. What we're trying to do is round off the nature of this operation to include the overnight boarding piece so that what's presented to the consumers, dog owners, matches their expectations. Their expectations being a facility that's reliable, one-stop, handling both daycare and night operations. And again, I think it goes back to what I started saying, that that's to be encouraged and supported by confidence that the consumer, the dog owner, has in getting to know the operators, getting to know the facility, to then have trust in the overnight part of it. And by doing that, they'll see how the operation works, they'll understand those 24/7 staffing, they'll get to know the people, and then they won't be sort of in the dark and having to guess at what an overnight boarding facility might include. So that correlates the consumer's expectation with the business owner, merchant's need to have the rounded off set of services in order to make it viable. And it truly is a fundamental component to be viable. As I mentioned, it's not really a traditional kennel concept. And I know that's the term of art that we were incorporated, and we understand that. We understand why, given the way the zoning ordinance reads. But respectfully submit that the purposes provision sort of override that objection. The second criteria is that the proposed use observe the spirit of the ordinance. And I think some of the rationale is similar to what I've described. For a variance to be inconsistent with the spirit of the ordinance, the proposed use must unduly and to a marked degree conflict with the ordinance to violate its basic purposes and objectives. And again, I don't think that's what's happening. We go to the purpose, we see the purpose is to have this correlation between consumer expectation and business ability to provide the full service. We see the two come together, and this one piece of this puzzle enables them to come together. The third criteria is that substantial justice be done when the variance is granted. And this is always this, I'm sure you've heard this numerous times, it's the classic, sort of the double negative analysis. The standard that our court in its infinite wisdom determined was that substantial justice is done if the general public receives no appreciable gain if the variance is denied, but the applicant is adversely and materially affected if it is denied. So if it's denied, the public doesn't really see much of a gain, but if it is denied, the applicant is severely hamstrung. I think what we're trying to say is that this is the case in what's before you. The applicant is substantially harmed if the variance is denied because it can't round off that business scope that both public and it need in order to make it a viable idea, and also to meet those purposes. And similarly, to correlate what they're trying to do today versus the sort of old notion of a kennel. In addition, of course, in any shopping center, shopping centers are always attempting to stay current with what shops and services they provide. So as businesses evolve and as the scope of services in a particular business evolve, shopping centers sort of need to be able to accommodate that. And if you're in a commercial district that has like virtually most towns do, a list of discrete permitted uses, but then the economy's changed, the nature of how businesses are presented change, you have to sort of interpret those ordinances to let that evolve a bit, so long as the evolution of those businesses doesn't markedly contradict the fundamental purposes of the district. And that's we would respectfully submit as the case. Fourth criteria is the use not diminish the value of surrounding properties. As noted, we're in a commercial district. We do recognize that there are residential street behind us, if you will. We don't think, though, that this proposal is fundamentally changing character. Again, the base use is permitted, so it's not the entire scope of use that's being evaluated here. It's really is the overnight boarding component the part that needs to be dealt with this evening. So a daycare facility with grooming, training, and all is a permitted use, no variance needed. But if we add in the indoor overnight part for boarding with the full-time staffing and with the outdoor area being limited in its purpose for those overnight uses, without, training, exercising groups out there during the evening, then we don't think that there's a adverse effect on property values when you boil it down to that kernel of what's going on. And also, of course, the plaza has a variety of other businesses, some of which I think Planet Fitness, for example, is a 24-hour-a-day operation. So there's clearly in and out in the plaza throughout. It's obviously on a commercial area. It's zoned that way purposely. It's got nice access through Route 114A, all of that. And the last criteria is the hardship criteria. The board's heard this one many times. The board is well aware that that for hardship to be found, special conditions must exist such that the literal enforcement of the ordinance results in an unnecessary hardship because of two factors. One being, owing to special conditions, that there's no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the application of that to this case. And secondly, it's a reasonable use. So it's this two-pronged approach, two-pronged test. We always first try to analyze what are the special conditions, and I think the special conditions they're fundamental really to what exists presently. A relatively large developed shopping center in a commercial district with an extensive existing infrastructure, parking access, utilities, and the like. And our use is minimal in that broad scope of the center, even including the outdoor play area. There's a variety of commercial uses there, and as I say, shopping centers need to have this capability of evolving, of meeting the times. That's the only way they stay vibrant. So you take a look at the purposes of the zoning provision in that context. And it's really now, I'm being redundant as to what I said, that again, the daycare component is permitted, the overnight is the part we're here for, but it's indoor, it's controlled, it's staffed appropriately, and again, we're in a commercial district, and fundamentally, we're trying to meet the purposes of the ordinance, which are to match the consumer expectation and the merchant's ability to deliver those. The second prong of the hardship test is that the proposed use be a reasonable one. Since the permitted use of daycare training, grooming is already permitted, the overnight use, if done in this, I think, controlled indoor manner, makes the core use reasonable as well. I appreciate very much your time, Mr. Chairman, and that of the board, and of course happy to answer any questions. And whatever nudges Mr. Valencourt wants to give me, I'll try to chime in on that as well. And again, we very much appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. What, did you want to add anything now? Okay, I didn't see any.
I'll wait for the
questions,
questions.
Board?
I have a few questions. In your drawing, you have a dashed line to the property boundary, but it's a little bit blurry in my drawing. How far is the outermost edge of the outdoor play area to the property boundary in the back there?
I believe that indicates it's about 100 feet from the edge of the fence out to the property line.
Okay.
Yeah, and that looks scaled off to me, correct? And I apologize for the smallness of that.
That's okay. It's an approximation.
Yeah, so I'm estimating that from the edge of our fence, going through the property line, up the embankment and across the street, it's probably a couple 100+ feet to the other side where the houses are. Roughly, I think roughly speaking.
Okay.
So in that same ilk, and I'm sure that planning will go over this as well, but is the intent to cordon off that entire section in that driveway so that fire apparatus and police can't go through?
No, just if you look at the little green part behind it, I'm not sure if we're looking at the same.
55 feet.
It's about 50 feet, 55 feet back from the building.
Give me just 1 second, I'm
Yeah,
colorblind.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see that in the drawing, so I was like trying to figure that out.
Yeah,
All right.
the
Thank you
dashed
for
blue
clearing that
line
up.
is just, the technical review committee, I know, has recommended that, for example, bollards be placed around,
Yeah,
around the fence, and we fully understand that, and we figure if we are fortunate to get to the planning board, that type of detail will be finalized. Yeah.
Does your business plan have an idea of how many dogs we're looking at approving to stay the night?
10 to 15, probably in that order, Scott, I think.
Overnight boarding,
Yeah.
Overnight?
probably after a couple of years in business and ramped up, we're projected about 10 on average. You know, probably less during the week, more, you know, on a Friday, Saturday night, and obviously school vacations. So,
Okay.
balance.
And just
going.
dogs?
Yes, dogs only.
I looked at the, you know, the franchise, the main business, and it seems to me it's like a boutique-y dog boarding, grooming place like you see out there, like the All Dogs and those kind of things. I assume, do they have minimal requirements for how big the pens have to be for overnight?
They do have,
By the way, for the record, Scott Valencourt, I should have said that at the beginning, I apologize.
they do have a vendor that we use for, again, what, you know, they refer to as condos.
Okay. Yeah, for businesses like those, I mean, typically, if you're not taking care of a pet's family member, a pet's family member, a family member's pet, as you were saying before, right? It tends to follow you very quickly now. So, I just wanted to make sure, you know, the number of pets. That was what my concern was. Anyone else?
And the concrete underneath the gravel is not going to be disturbed in a way where the urine from the animals can go all the way down. It will essentially go through the gravel and kind of rest. I'm kind of more worried about odors and things for the neighboring.
And let Scott give that a little bit of detail, because he's looked into it some fairly extensively.
Yeah.
From what we've learned in a TRC meeting and with the town engineer, our initial thought was possibly they have these 1-inch grates, I guess you want to call them, that have channels that the artificial turf would go on top of, and you put these on top of the pavement. It was brought to our attention that would obviously cause runoff, and we don't want that. Again, that's why we went to the TRC to learn. So he actually had suggested, you know, if we were willing to pull up the asphalt where the play area is going to be, put in approximately, I think the industry standard is approximately 4 inches of gravel.
Okay.
The artificial turf, commercial grade, and it's specific for canines. So it's not just your normal Home Depot that doesn't flow through, so, you know, would be sitting on the top. That's why I have to absorb. So it would drain through that, would not be puddling, if that answers your question.
I think so.
Okay.
No? Bruce?
No, I think a lot of these concerns are gonna really show up on the site plan if it gets through for a variance, you know, permeability of the artificial stuff.
I see in Jack's notes, a better way to handle the pet waste coming out of the facility. Was that ever discussed?
Like solid waste, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Are you talking just in general, outside and inside?
Yeah,
Yeah, basically it would be,
it adds up quick.
oh, yes,
Size of the
yes.
dog.
It would, we would have small groups of dogs, so for instance, we have a small group in the outside play area, there will be at least one staff member. We have solid waste, you know, the policy would be to, you know, pick that up immediately, double bag in biodegradable bags, put in a sealed container, and then that would go into the sealed, closed trash outside.
I know that the brewery right next door has outdoor
Yes.
dining to the left of where the yard's gonna be. So I just see that being an issue if that wasn't taken care of.
As I said, hopefully the site plan process will address that.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, correct.
As the concern from.
Thank you.
All right.
I was wondering if I could maybe read the table lists section 5.5 as well, the definition of the commercial kennel and the rules associated, and I don't have that here on the variance, but I think we're looking at a variance against that one as well. Section 5.5 reads, kennels are permitted by special exemption provided that they are located on lots not less than 2 acres and that no buildings or structures for commercial kennel are located within 100 feet away from any lot line. And I understand this is a huge lot and it's in a smaller section of it. That's why I asked about the footage. 100 feet at least is the one barrier that we have in section 5.5. And the lot is technically, the whole lot is more than 2 acres, but it is adjacent directly to other uses.
So they may need a variance to that because it's larger than 2 acres.
The building or structure would be within, yeah, it's kind of a special case there.
Boy, I don't think we didn't notice the meeting for.
I didn't notice it until late this afternoon. Yes.
So I would advise, our setbacks are 2 lot lines, not in between different uses
Okay.
on the same lot.
Okay.
So provided they maintain a 100-foot setback from the lot lines, which is what they show on their plot plan, that would not require a variance. What it would be is an issue taken up at site plan with the planning board and by the property owner that's leasing the property with the tenants.
Thank you, sir.
I think that they're trying to do is not really label it or pigeonhole it as a commercial kennel. They're going more from the doggy daycare with overnight. And because the overnight's not in the table, they need a variance because it's not a use that's permitted.
Right, the other things
I'm
in section
speaking for the
5.4 are
applicant.
animal breeding
Right.
and those sorts of uses. It's not, it's all livestock, it's not dogs necessarily in the rest of the section.
But again, it could, at first, it's like, oh my gosh, we'd have to have a notice for variance because it's a commercial. Kennel doesn't have the amount of, they have too much.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add to that too, if I may, thank you both. I think perhaps what Mr. Shepherd determined was the daycare use doesn't include the overnight. Overnight is only a component of a kennel, but to expand the daycare use for the overnight piece, not to become a kennel, if you will, but to add that piece, that was the need for the variance. I did read that section 5.52, I was thinking about it, and if you go back to the table of uses in the agricultural district, it shows SE, special exception for kennel. I thought of 5.5 as modifying only the special exception use in the context of the agricultural district, not a generic zoning ordinance component that fully enveloped the entire ordinance, if you see what I mean. That was at least how I thought of it too. And because what it did was it conditioned the nature of the special exception in the agricultural district. So I don't know if I illuminated or not, but at least that's what I was thinking as well. So, but obviously, as the gentleman said, the lot lines are an analysis of the full lot, of course.
Yeah, I've always, for that kind of thing, I've always looked at it as if it was a subsection, like 5.4, right, specifically
G or
addresses
something like that.
agricultural.
Right.
5.5 is its own next
I know,
unit.
exactly. So that's what threw me. You're absolutely right. That, and then I said, well, then I looked at it back to the table and,
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes the zoning ordinance does that here. Awesome. Any other questions, concerns, comments? Anything less to add right now?
we just appreciate it very much, your time.
Thank you. I'll ask you to step back for just a minute. I'll open up the discussion to the public. You may not have to go far. Is there anybody in the public that wishes to speak on this? Oh, sir. Please, come on up.
Okay, should I stand or sit?
It's up to you. Sitting is a lot more comfortable, but, you know, it's entirely up to you. We just ask your name and your address.
My name is Jay Hunter. I'm at 42 Moose Club Park Road in Goffstown. And we are in a butter. And the attorney was quick to say, oh, this is a commercially zoned area. This area is surrounded by residences. This owner happens to be the worst possible neighbor you could ever ask for. For the last 5 years, I've been dealing with trash problems with him. Blowing into my yard, boxes, styrofoam, plastic in the trees. I've called here for help. I was going to call the police, but I didn't want to get them involved. I got the building inspector involved. He's been over there talking to people to try to get them to clean up their act. They have outdoor dumpsters where apparently they don't use or they misuse, and trash blows out into our yard and some of the neighbors' yards. And now they're talking about putting trash cans for waste. I can't conceive how they're going to control that. And I particularly am totally opposed to this proposal.
Anybody have any questions or comments? I think you bring up a good point. I think that's gonna end up falling under the site plan and the planning board, but it generates a question on waste management that I will ask the applicant. just need to write the question down before I forget it, so bear with me for just a second. Thank you. All right, sir, thank you very much, and we will keep going.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Okay. Oh, sir, come on up. Hello.
My name is Darrell Reuter. I live at 5 Moose Club Park Road. My only question was, with the fenced-in areas, is there going to be, is there plans for like additional lighting? If there's floodlights or anything like that that would be on all night long?
I believe that the application specifically says that this is for daytime care only.
Okay.
For the outside, but I will make sure that we ask that question.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Seeing none, folks, if you want to come on back, we'll just address a couple more questions and let you summarize, and we'll go on from there. So in deference to what the butters asked, is there a landlord directive in your lease that will indicate that you have to have your own trash cans?
I believe so. I'm not 100% sure.
Is that your plan anyway?
Yes, that is our plan.
All right.
And Scott explained, I think that the waste, the sealed waste can will be how processed. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally respect his thought on this, and as a dog daycare owner, one of the worst things for business is smell, other than the lack of supervision. So that will definitely, be addressed as we stated. It's not just a policy that we're telling the board to get approval. That is a policy we will be following, immediately, picking up solid waste and disposing it in a manner where it will not smell.
And I would assume that if, neighbors had an issue, you would be happy to address it.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
I think it's fundamental for their operation to police their space scrupulously, irrespective of what else is going on in the plaza.
Mhm. As, one of the things that as a board we can do is use our personal experiences to help our judgment. And as a business owner in a plaza myself, I understand what some of those questions would be. So, sir?
I guess I have to clarify my feeble mind. Are you the owner of the whole complex? You're going to be the proposed tenant?
We are proposed tenants, yes.
Okay. Just
Yeah.
from the discussion, it sounded like you were the prior living tenants or something, with whatever happened prior. Okay.
And obviously, entering into the lease is really dependent on getting the approvals in place. The
Right,
lease
sure.
makes no value unless the approvals exist, both here and planning.
Right.
Yeah. There was also the question on lighting, and Scott should address that.
That was going to be
Please,
the
if
next
you would,
question.
Scott.
Yep. Absolutely, again, totally respect that question. We have no plans to do, again, any outside activity at night. Sure, in the winter, it gets dark at 3:30? We'll have to have some lighting for the safety of our staff, but, at 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 in the morning, no. There won't be, any floodlights on. There'll be no activity out there.
Very good. Any other questions? Anything else to add?
No?
All
I
right.
think we're fine, thank you.
Thank you for coming up. I will close the public session and we will enter into deliberative.
Thank you.
Folks. Sir, you don't have to leave if you don't want to. This isn't closed, so you're welcome to stay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I had to wrestle with this a little bit. So I was looking in the table of permitted uses, and they stated in the application that the D8 line, doggy daycare, same as a dog obedience school training was a permitted use. D6, which is veterinarian services, is also a permitted use. In my experience, sometimes the veterinarians have overnight because they're carrying some dog or a cat that's obviously infirmed. We don't define what the veterinarian services are, so that's up to interpretation. So I can kind of see a little bit of a likeness of possibly having some overnight facility in the veterinarian services. I have a question that I have to ask myself, would a pet store be allowed? Pet stores have overnight whatever. We don't have a line item for pet store, so they would need to get a variance if they want to do a pet store. So again, it's that little narrow part of the overnight that I have to kind of wrestle with of, gee, it's really not mentioned in what they want to do. They basically want a doggy daycare with overnight capabilities. That's the way I read the application. They're indicating 10 overnight, probably more in the weekends, which makes sense. If that is a heartache for the number of overnights, you can always limit that. I don't like doing that. Again, that's maybe a function of the site plan as well.
Yeah,
But-
that's where I think that would probably come up is from the site plan. 'Cause I don't see how from a zoning well, I mean, I suppose we could from a zoning perspective. For me to add to that, I would need to do research on how
Right.
much space an
Right.
animal needs,
Right.
and that's why franchises have those things. They have rules for that, so.
I think the outside player is a good thing, but I think all the, not objections, all the comments about outdoor needs to be addressed through the site plan. It should, obviously. I mean, we'll probably forward some of those as well. The only other concern I would have, again, that brew pub outdoors and maybe the restaurant that's in the corner, it's not outdoor, but any barking areas if somehow sound, I don't know what the configuration within the mall is, if there needs to be any sort of sound partitions between the tenant space or just encapsulate his, so that the inside noise doesn't go to the other, the barkings and stuff.
The dentist there too, and
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think that's in our purview. That's more of a landlord issue
Yeah, it
than
is.
it is a zoning board issue.
I'm just commenting
Yeah,
that
no,
if I was eating a lunch,
Mhm.
or I'm having a beer, and the dogs are barking two down, it's like, this isn't too, whatever. It obviously impacts the neighbor businesses and that guys. If they happen to be barking, they might not be, they might be all good behaved, who knows? But,
Yep, and when it comes to those kind of things, that is almost 100% a tenant landlord issue. At least for my experiences, trust me on that one.
Yeah, and that's also part of the doggy daycare, which is already permitted by use. And so in the question of overnight,
right,
dogs barking, at least during the daytime, is not the issue there.
that's not an
It's
issue because
just
it's a
can they
permitted
stay
use.
the night?
Right.
And they're not gonna be
Barking at
outside
night.
at night. They're gonna be
Correct.
boarded at night, so.
I'm looking at Jack's first item on his letter. A commercial kennel is permitted in an agricultural zone with special exception.
Right,
This is not an agricultural zone, it's a commercial.
that's why,
That's why we're here.
from his mindset,
So
describe it.
there's a gray area there, right? And the zoning is for overnight use, but it's not for
Variance.
this, right?
Right.
We're not going for special
Right.
exception. No.
Correct. Yeah, I would still say that the definition of the special exception in 5.5 that we read with the 100-foot
Right.
setback,
Okay.
if we're looking at approving it, I would probably put the condition that it is on the 100-foot setback from that back line, just to make sure that it is within the spirit of the ordinance. For, in this other use, we have a 100-foot setback. They're already planning on having it 100 feet off, but just to make sure that it is,
Memorialize it in the decision,
yes.
essentially.
I would agree with that, because I went to section 3.4, which defines what supplemental standards are, and the last sentence of that says, "The reference standards shall apply to all such uses in all districts in which the use is located, regardless of whether the use is permitted by right, special exception, or conditional use permit." So my understanding would be, even if we allow it in a zone that it normally wouldn't be allowed in, we do need to make sure the supplemental standards still apply. And as of right now, because they do have the 100-foot buffer between the end of where their fenced-in area is going to be and the property line, I do believe that they already meet the requirements of 5.5, but they need to make sure. So I do agree that making sure that we have that in the motion that we make is important.
But I agree that there's a need in our community for, I feel like everyone's getting dogs and needs someone. They're working during the day. Our costs of homes are so much that you need everybody in the household working. They need something to do with the dogs. So there's definitely a need for more dog training facilities, boarding, and doggy daycares, and using strip mall space that we're having trouble in this day and age keeping strip mall space well utilized. And I think that because it fills a need in the community, that it would be something desirable for Goffstown.
And to add to that, I think it's important to understand that a lot of businesses that look to do doggy daycare would be looking to do boarding services. I have trouble thinking of any places in the area that I can think of that only do daycare services. I'm sure they exist, and that's probably by the constraints of the people who run the operation, but I know as a dog owner and, you know, interacting with a lot of dog owners, it would be difficult to establish a relationship with two different places. One for the dog to go during the day and you really love them, but they can't, for whatever reason, have the boarding overnight, but you trust them, and then you have to establish a separate relationship with a place that can board your dog, or cut off the relationship with the person who can't.
That was the one technical counter that I had written in my notes, is that there are businesses like this that do operate without overnight boarding.
Yeah.
So they could go forward without the variance
Yeah.
and still be successful. So,
And I understand
you know,
that, but
but as a dog owner myself, I have 3. I completely understand, and I agree with you.
exactly.
I'm wrestling with the location of that 5,400 square foot space. Big Lots is gone, there's a lot of empty spots towards the Fun City where there's not a restaurant, there's not Domino's, there's not the vape shop, there's not the dentist, right in the middle of all that. At the end, on the other side, but that place is vacant and empty, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
but we can't dictate to a
No, I understand,
landlord.
that's,
Right.
I'm wrestling with the location in between all that. That's, the
To make
business,
it
it sounds
a-
great, it's great.
To make it a successful venture,
Yeah.
right, that's what I was saying, was having the noise stuff.
Yes,
Yeah, so it's not the ideal location, the ideal might be down after the corner, but we're here for the use, not
Yes,
necessarily
yes,
placing
actually, I
the
don't-
location.
I
What
understand.
is interesting about that, and Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we grant this variance, it actually goes to the property, right?
Correct.
So it could be that huge spots at Big Lots, it could be a third of that 5,400 square feet. It's there, so,
The site plan will determine the actual tenants.
right,
Yeah.
right, but, you know, like.
For us, we're giving it a blanket use for the
On
whole
that
plaza.
property, for the
Right,
plaza, yeah.
Correct. Granted, this one's narrow in this tenant space, would like to do this use. If they want to do 8,000 square feet, they might have to come back and say, look, we'd like to have 8,000 foot of, because they've only got a variance for 4,000. We're not giving a variance for the whole thing. We're giving a variance for 4,000.
No, that was my
Right?
point, the variance
Oh, whatever
goes to the
that-
property. It goes to 550 Mass Road, which is the plaza.
Containing a use of 5,000 of a overnight dog daycare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's just the example space, though. If
Yep.
down the road, somebody came in and wanted to use the entire Big Lot space for doggy daycare, I think the variance would still follow that.
And that's why I don't think it would. Maybe I'd have an easy argument, because they've already got one for 4,000 square feet.
I think it would unless we specify that it must be in this space.
Or less
and-
than,
and I don't-
a specific square footage. I would,
Right.
I would be loath to say, well, okay, we're going to pick, you know, A, B, C, D, E, unit D can have this, but I think that'd be a little bit hard to defend.
That's a better task for Jack in the future.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I want to do that.
All right, good discussion. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to grant, and I'm going to go through the criteria.
Please.
That granting of the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because it's so close to doggy daycare, and it's by indicated also veterinarian services. I think sometimes has overnight allowances, even though it's subtle, it's not addressed. And I think that's within the spirit of the public interest. I believe the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. A similar explanation as I did in the first criteria is that we have permitted uses by right, the doggy daycare and the veterinarian services. Again, they're asking variance to have overnight accommodations. Granting the variance would do substantial justice for everybody, for the mall owner. I think for the property owners, their concerns would get addressed through the site plan issues at the planning board. For those reasons, the values of the surrounding properties, it would not be diminished. I think any activity that they're doing improvements to the mall, so that whole mall facade is going to get an improvement. Surrounding property values, it's hard to determine in the backside, the residential. But again, if there's limits from the planning board as to outdoor activities, I think the overnight question probably would get addressed through the site plan. The unnecessary hardships, actually, his argument had a good... I'd answer it to the second one, the double lowercase I. Proposed use is a reasonable use, and that's because it's so closely tied to the doggy daycare and to the veterinarian services. That's, to me, it's an obvious reasonable use. They're asking for additional overnight. There is a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision. Actually, it's not a provision, it's missing in the ordinance. And that the application of the provisions to the property because, again, the overnight is not specifically allowed or permitted use, but everything that's related to that, the doggy daycare, veterinarian service, are permitted uses. It's just a little, I think the applicant said kernel of the corn to do the overnight. So I'd make a motion to grant this variance on those.
So we have a motion to grant by Bruce.
Second.
A second by John. Just to clarify, Davis, you'll be voting. All those in favor?
Actually,
Whoa.
if I may, I want to add that the criteria of 100 foot per that section 5.5, I heard you.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Be
Sorry.
included as that approval per that regulation requirement of the 100 foot step, substantial, what's that, substantial, supplemental regulation 5.5.
John, you good with that?
Yes.
Okay,
All right,
thank
so
you.
second stands.
You're voting, everybody's voting.
Oh, that's right, I forgot, everyone's voting because
Yes.
Denise isn't here. Thank you, member of the audience. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so, moving on, because Denise has to recuse herself for this one too. Wayne R. Surratt Living Trust and Sandra R. Canada Thistle Revocable Living Trust. Applicants' owners are seeking 2 variances and a special exception to allow for the existing home occupation business to build a 2,160 square foot detached office garage for the business that has expanded into a plumbing and office business use known as WWW Surratt Brothers Incorporated Plumbing, Heating, and HVAC. The proposed use is allowed by special exception per section 3.11.1 sub 11, table of principal uses of the Goffstown zoning ordinance, landscaping, contracting, or similar business. The first variance is required as the lot has 2 acres, whereas 5 acres is required for the business use per section 5.12 of the Goffstown zoning ordinance. The second variance for the business use per section 5.12 of the Goffstown zoning ordinance, I just read that wrong. The second variance is required as the proposed structure will have a 40-foot and 65-foot side setback from the side property lines, whereas a 100-foot setback is required per section 5.12 of the Goffstown zoning ordinance. The property is located at 294 Goffstown Back Road, map 6, lot 11, zoned agricultural.
Hi.
Actually, hold on for 1 minute. Do I have a motion for no regional impact?
So moved.
Moved by Davis, second by John. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
For the record, my name is Maria Dolder. I'm the attorney for the applicant, and Elaine Surratt is sitting here with me. As you indicated, this property is located at 295 Goffstown Back Road, and it is in your agricultural district. This property currently houses a single-family home with an attached garage and a shed. As indicated in the application, Mr. Surratt has operated his plumbing business as a home occupation at this particular property for more than 25 years with no issue or complaint. And as you know, home occupation is permitted under your zoning ordinance. The home occupation has historically been located in the space that's above the attached residential garage, which can be seen by the road. You can see the picture of the property. It's attached to the house. Because Mr. Surratt operates a plumbing business, all of his service work is actually performed at customers' properties. Obviously, he doesn't do service work at his residential property. The home occupation itself solely functions as a business office and for storage of his plumbing supplies. He employs 1 office manager who does work on site, and he has 2 project managers that kind of split time between the office and the field, but they're not there at the office full-time. It's only 1 full-time employee that stays on the property with him. And all of that is permitted under your home occupation zoning ordinance. So basically, his field employees, if they are coming to his property, will come to the property, they may collect some supplies, park their car if they have another vehicle and picking up a truck, and then they leave the property. So not all of the field employees will always stay at the property or come to the property, but if they need supplies, clearly they will be doing that. There is absolutely no outside storage associated with this business. All the plumbing supplies, which is basically pipes, fittings, faucet cartridges, those types of things, they're currently stored within the residential garage. I did give you a little history of the property in the application, but I'm not going to go through that for these purposes. What he's proposing to do at this point in time is to construct a detached barn-style garage. He wants to basically do that as an accessory use to the structure, his residence. So it's going to be an accessory garage. That particular use in and of itself is permitted by right. His intent is to relocate his home gym into that accessory structure and to use a portion of it for, residential items, like if he has machinery or something, like lawnmower or something to that effect that he uses on his residence. So he will be using that detached garage for residential purposes. Like I said, that portion is permitted by right. He could go get a building permit for that today. The reason that we're here before you is because he would like to relocate the office for his plumbing business from his attached residential garage to this detached garage. And technically, under your zoning ordinance, your home occupation says that it has to be located within the residential structure. So this no longer falls under your home occupation because we want to put it in a detached property structure on the residential property. The important things to note is that the nature and the operation of the business will not change at all. All that's going to happen is the office and the storage is just going to be moved from one garage structure to a different garage structure on the property. They will still be fully contained on the property, and the portion of the garage that he's intending to use for his business will not exceed 2,000 square feet. So that's kind of the general idea as to how big it is. And as you will see, as part of the application, we had kind of made a note that we had gone to the town to try and argue that this was a better use that fell under your zoning ordinance for a business use, an office use that didn't exceed 2,000 square feet. Unfortunately, the town disagreed with us, so that's why we're here today and asking for the relief. The proposed garage will be built on the back side of the property. So it's going to be facing the sand pit that is owned by the applicant's cousin. So this particular property is very unique because it has a sand pit that surrounds it on one entire side and the rear of the property. A little unique for a residential property. The garage itself will screen all vehicles from view, so any of those vehicles that are stored, or if an employee leaves their vehicle on site, the garage itself will screen that from the view from the road. His intent actually, and why we say like it's a barn style garage, is because his intent is to actually make the property look like a farm at the end of this project. It used to be a farm at one point in time, and so he'd like to kind of keep that nature and character to this property. As I've already stated, the sand pit that surrounds it is owned by the applicant's cousin. There's also a right-of-way that surrounds the entire right and rear side of the property in order to access that sand pit. There's about a 200-foot wooded buffer on the left side of the property. So that's the other side of the property, which creates a large natural buffer from the closest other neighbor. So it has basically those two abutting neighbors. One's the sand pit, the other's a residence, but there's at least a probably 200-foot wooded buffer between them. We do have letters of support from a few of the neighbors. One is Melanie Surratt, who is the owner of the sand pit, and one I think is one of the properties across the street. Just want to pass those if you don't mind, just so that they're in the record. I also would like to just point out that there are no commercial signs that are visible on the property, and that will remain the case even with this application. The only sign that you can actually view from the road is a copy of the applicant's grandparents' original poultry farm sign. So that exists. It's kind of a historic sign that they like to keep on the property. So as you indicated, we do need, because of the way that this has been just defined, it's defined as a landscaping business in agricultural district. And like I said, although we disagree that the use of this particular proposal is as intense as what an landscaping business might be, we do need a special exception and 2 variances. I'm going to walk through the variances first, because I think that much of our, argument to the special exception is going to be raised during the variance application criteria. So I think it's just easier if the board is okay with me walking through the variances first. So the first one, that granting the variance is not contrary to the public interest. As you all know, in order to be contrary to the public interest, this variance must unduly and in a marked degree conflict with your ordinance such that it violates your ordinance's basic zoning objectives. In order to ascertain whether or not that would happen, you basically look at whether or not this would alter the essential characteristics of the neighborhood, or if it would threaten the public health, safety, or welfare of the public. We would argue that the requested variances do neither of those. The ultimate use being proposed is permitted by special exception under your zoning ordinance, and quite frankly, it's already established on the property and has been working on this property for at least 25 years with no complaints or issues. This request is solely to relocate the existing office from the attached residential garage to the detached residential garage. That is it. That's the only thing that will change under this circumstance. The nature and the operation of the business is not going to change at all. Like I said, it's still going to be fully contained on the property. With the construction of the garage, it will allow the plumbing business to be moved from the residential structure, which is right on the road, to behind the residential structure, so it's a little bit further. It's actually going to be facing the sand pit that's owned by the applicant's cousin and buffered from the closest neighbor by at least a 200-foot wooded natural buffer. Being able to relocate his well, basically home occupation to a different portion of the property will not alter the essential characteristics of this neighborhood. It's not going to threaten the public health, safety, or welfare. As a result, this is not contrary to the public interest to grant the variances that we're requesting. As we look at the specific variances, your zoning ordinance basically would require this lot to be 5 acres in size in order to do this. Even with that said, the applicant is reasonably able to establish this garage on this lot without it being 5 acres. And as I already indicated, the building itself can be constructed on this property by right if we don't move the business into it. So the structure itself will not have any impact due to the fact that it's 2 acres as opposed to 5 acres. The same can be said of the increased setbacks. Once again, the garage is permitted to be on the lot. It will meet all of your base setbacks, and it will actually exceed your base setbacks. We are able to meet your increased setback on the front and the rear. It's the 2 sides that we need the relief from. So the fact that this has been basically defined as a landscaping business is the sole thing that triggers these supplemental standards. It's the only thing that triggers the fact that we need it to be 5 acres and we need increased setbacks. But the garage itself can be put there today in this exact location. So from our perspective, we do not think that it's reasonable to impose these increased supplemental standards simply because Mr. Surratt wants to move his business from the attached residence to the detached structure. So it's our position that this will not alter the essential characteristics of the neighborhood. It will remain in keeping with the established neighborhood, and it's going to be consistent with the current use of the property. The spirit of the ordinance is observed. Once again, the property is located in the agricultural district. The actual use being proposed, as it's been classified by the town, is permitted by special exception. Although we are unable to meet your increased lot size and setback requirements, neither of those requested variances have any adverse impact on the neighborhood itself. Once again, and I know I'm going to repeat myself a lot, unfortunately the variance, that happens, but this is simply relocating an existing business on the property from one structure to another into a garage that's permitted to be on the property by right. Nothing is going to change in how he operates the business. The office and the associated storage is just moving from one garage to a different one. It will still be, it will still have increased setbacks that are required under this. They just won't be able to meet the 100-foot setbacks. Like I said, we can meet the front and rear, we just can't meet your sides. But there will still be greater setbacks than is required under your base zoning district. So if he was just building the garage, we wouldn't have to meet those. So we are able to keep a little bit more of a setback on both sides. And then bear in mind that our setback is from a sands pit, and then we have a very large natural buffer to our next neighbor. So we do not think that those will adversely impact anybody, and that is certainly within the spirit of your ordinance. 3, granting the variance would do substantial justice. As you heard before, basically the guiding rule when you look at substantial justice is that any loss to the individual that's not outweighed by a gain to the public is deemed an injustice. Under this standard, the applicant clearly satisfies it. If the town is to deny the applicant's request to simply relocate his home business from one building to another building on the same property, this would be a tremendous loss to the applicant. And we don't see any justified gain to the public in preventing him from doing that. Given the fact that the nature and the operation of this business is currently operating, it's not going to change. It's been on this property for over 25 years without any issue or any complaints. There really is no rationale or anything to be gained by denying him from moving it from one structure to another. Substantial justice is also achieved when you can grant variances that don't adversely impact on nearby property owners and which allow a property to be used reasonably. And so for all the same reasons that I just set forth, this is going to allow the property to be used reasonably for his business, and there will not be any adverse impact on the nearby neighbors by allowing this move. The values of surrounding properties will not be diminished. Once again, this garage, the structure itself is permitted by right, so the structure being constructed in this location will have no impact. It's not going to diminish the area because he would be allowed to do that by right. Moving his office from one spot on the property to a different spot on the property also will not have any diminishment on the value of properties in the area. Once again, like I said, one whole side and the rear is a sand pit, so clearly having this business in this location is not going to diminish the sand pit in any way. The closest neighbor on the other side has about a 200-foot wooded buffer, so they're going to be buffered from the location of this garage under all circumstances. So therefore, that will not impact their property values in any adverse manner. So unnecessary hardship. I do think that this is a pretty unique circumstance. I mean, the property as it currently exists today is being used for this exact purpose. And it is permitted under your zoning ordinance as it's currently being used. The plumbing business, we believe, is better characterized as a small general business that's not going to exceed 2,000 square feet. And the truth is, it's only due to the fact that the town classifies it under landscaping, business in the agricultural district, that any variances are needed at all. If it were classified as just the general business office, we could do that by special exception only. We would not need any variance relief to have that business office moved. We also believe that this particular lot itself is unique in its surroundings. So that's usually one of your hardship criteria, is just showing the uniqueness of this particular lot. This particular lot is surrounded on two sides by a sand pit. It's a residential property. That is unique to this particular lot and causes hardships on how you get to use it or how people would want to use it. And so I think that that is unique to this lot and makes this another example of how hardship impacts this particular owner. The use of this property back in the day was a farm operation, and it has been utilized as a home plumbing business for the last 25 years. So a continuance of this particular use in a similar nature is certainly warranted, given that we're asking for very minimal relief. And so we do think that that creates a hardship in the determination that it's allowed as long as it's within the residence, but somehow not allowed once we put it in the detached garage. The proposed use is a reasonable one because, once again, this use is permitted by a special exception. It would be permitted as a home occupation by right, and it's already established on the property, so we do deem that this is a reasonable use. It's a reasonable area. There have not been any issues or complaints that he is aware of within the last 25 years that he's been operating it. So we do think that this is reasonable to request that we take the home occupation from the attached residential structure and put it behind it in a detached structure that's going to be accessory to the residence and used for his business purposes. In terms of the special exception, unless you have questions, I'm trying to just move us along, but if you have any initial questions, feel free to ask me, otherwise I'll go through the special exception.
Yeah, I think we'll do the variances separate, just to.
Okay.
If I could just comment?
Yeah.
It might be a point of order. So I understand that the home occupation is going away.
Yes.
Losing that standing, because it creates now a mixed use, where we have to go and probably get a variance for the mixed use section of our ordinance, because we have a residential use that's staying, and now we're moving, the home occupation is dissolving, and you're moving this plumbing business to another structure.
So under section 512 of the zoning ordinance, while it says landscaping business in an agricultural district, you actually, it talks when it's if accessory to a primary residence. When you actually look at the table of uses under this use, it's actually landscaping, contracting, or similar business. This is how we have treated it with similar properties in the past. I believe you had property on Greer Road in the last couple of years. I don't know if that one actually went to public hearing. I know they continued a bunch of times.
It stayed continued.
Yeah, but we have dealt with other ones, town has, and 512, we've always looked at that as allows it as,
But like, what I'm saying is that they're arguing or discussing that the home occupation is moving, but it's not really, because you can't have a home occupation. That's gone away once you move it out of the building,
Yep.
right, out of the residence.
But I guess what Mr. Horn is saying is under your ordinance, to have this landscaping, it has to be accessory to a residential use. So that's why we don't need a variance to
To
establish.
have a mixed use?
Yes, for
Wow.
this particular use, it's supposed to be accessory to your residential use in the agricultural district.
Oh, if you go down the path of being contractor's business or whatever.
Yeah.
So even though, so I
Okay,
agree.
no, I
yeah, no,
just
so,
want to clarify
yeah,
that.
I 100% agree that we do
Okay,
not
right.
fall under the home occupation
Right,
anymore.
that's gone now, right, okay,
Um,
okay.
But this is still technically an accessory use. It's just, we can't fall under the home occupation.
Even though you
because-
disagree it's not that use, right, you should have
It's
challenged.
kind of the same thing that we were running into in a couple of the other things where it's like a strange definition. Like it took me a while to look at that landscaping piece and
If it
and
wasn't,
realize that
if it wasn't the
portion too.
landscaping that is an accessory to that residential use, we would have that, we'd have to get a variance, say it was general office.
Correct,
That's not an accessory to the residential.
correct.
Then you'd be here for a variance to allow mixed use on one parcel. Right, yes.
Yeah, but it falls
Okay,
under
because-
the
Yeah, but
commercial.
because the town,
Okay,
and we
yeah.
didn't argue, like.
Thankfully, the town
I was gonna say,
classified it.
The town classified it that way, and we decided to just try and go this route,
yeah.
and
Okay. yeah,
They didn't
okay.
change the
No, I just
heading.
wanted to get, I just wanted to get the standing correct on.
yes,
right,
absolutely,
okay, that's-
you are correct.
yeah, Okay, thank
That
you.
might be something that we bring up in that joint meeting, is
Yeah.
fixing that so
I
that
have a question.
it's not just a
The new
heading.
building, water, bathrooms, septic system?
Yes.
Okay. And that would probably, if I see a septic system, it would have to be in the back, behind the building?
It's going to tie into the existing
Oh, it's gonna
septic.
tie into the exist, okay.
Yeah, we hired St. Ange to drop a set of
Okay.
plans, have it approved.
Any other questions on?
I have a question. Are you both, are you living in the house and the owner of the company?
Yes.
Both?
Correct.
Yes.
'Cause I know
On
that's,
site. Yeah, whatever.
that's been an issue before, so.
Okay.
I think we could,
We done with the questions on the variances? Just good to see. You're not gonna, are you planning on arguing against this? I didn't think so. Oh, well, hey, listen, you never know.
I have a real problem with kids.
I have my soda, I was ready, you know.
No, I mean,
No, so, why don't we do the special exception 2 and then we'll do all the voting and then we'll be done.
perfect. So I think this, as I said, the reason why I left the special exception for the second half is I think most of my logic is already expressed in the variance application, so I can keep this one pretty brief. The specific site is an appropriate location for such use, being consistent with the town's current master plan. Once again, the applicant has operated his plumbing business as a home occupation at this property for more than 25 years without issue or complaint. The operation of the business is not going to change, so the primary function will still remain a small business office with all of the service to be performed at the customer's properties. There is no outside storage associated with the business. The size or frequency of the use will not significantly alter the character of the neighborhood. Once again, as I indicated, he's already been operating this as a home occupation for the last 25 years. That is not going to change, so there is not going to be any kind of change in size or frequency of people visiting the site. It will be what it is today, just to a different location of the property. The use will not create a nuisance or hazard to vehicles or pedestrians in a manner that you can't basically fix. Once again, this is just a small home business, it's a home occupation that we've turned into a small business. It's an office, and as I indicated, he'll have one full-time employee on site He has 2 that come and split some time on site and in the field, but all of his other employees are field employees, and their visits to the property are simply to pick up supplies. Anything else is going to be office-related within that building. The proposed location is of sufficient size to allow for adequate and appropriate facilities for proper operation of the use. As I indicated during the variance, the construction of the detached barn itself is permitted by right as an accessory use to the residential structure, and it meets all of your zoning requirements in its location size for the building itself. The business use operating within it, we've already talked about that through the variances on what we need for relief, but we don't think that this causes any issue that it's not of sufficient size to allow for this to occur. Clearly, his home occupation has existed on this particular 2-acre lot for 25 years. There's no reason to think that it can't continue to operate in the same location. The proposed location is of sufficient size to allow for appropriate buffers of this use to adjacent properties. As I indicated, the whole right side and the whole rear side is abutted by a gravel pit or a sand pit. And so clearly there's no need to really buffer from that. In fact, we were talking earlier that the garage will help buffer him a little bit from the sand pit, so that would be nice for this particular property. And then on the other closest neighbor, there is a large wooded natural buffer, so it'll buffer this particular garage from their house location. And that was all I had for the special exception, because like I said, I kind of assumed that we'd roll it all in to the same arguments with the variance.
Very good. Any further questions from the board? Sir?
So, just to clarify.
Yeah.
The reason that you need the special exception is because the town has determined that the moving of the home occupation into the new structure reclassifies the same existing business from the home occupation to the landscaping business, which itself now needs the special exception too. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I just needed to.
No, that's not, yeah.
I needed that confirmed because it's very complicated.
It is a little complicated, but like we worked with the town on them, like kind of laying out how they saw it and what we needed. So we all came to this conclusion that yes, exactly that. Because once it gets defined as something different, it is permitted in the zone, but by special exception.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also wanted to point out that you are outgrowing the home occupation because the home occupation is defined as of only having one additional full-time employee in addition to the resident. And so if you have more than one employee, you need to outgrow the home occupation.
Yeah, I did indicate to him that if he were to stay as a home occupation, for example, if this didn't go through, obviously he'll stay as a home occupation, that he could only keep that one full-time employee on site.
And this is going to require a site plan as well through the planning board. So that buffer issue, which is probably, if I was to put any condition, I would say to maintain the supplemental standard of the buffer, even though you've got some natural ones that do occur, that's tried to adhere to through the planning board site plan, not telling them they have to, but to try to exercise that.
Is there do you know, is there an additional buffer in addition to what we have?
In the site plan, I doubt it.
Okay.
I think it's just to satisfy
Yep.
a buffer.
Yeah, and I don't think you have any intent in cutting those trees
Right.
in the buffer area, right?
No, I don't know.
I think from that particular standard was something about enclosing equipment and storage with the buffer, to be buffered, something like that.
Okay, so they don't have, yeah, we don't have any of that,
Right.
we don't have any out.
And that would show up on
anything
site
outside.
plan. You know,
Correct.
typically, they'll have the racks or
Yep.
something.
And what Wayne was saying is most of that buffer is on his neighbor's property, so he has no ability to cut them anyway.
Right.
Wonderful. Pardon me, any other questions? Okay, seeing that there's nobody in the, well, actually, I take that back. Are there any comments? All right, then I will close the public hearing
Thank
and
you.
we will enter into deliberative. Pleasure.
No,
You're good?
it was just the wrestling of losing the home occupation into the,
So just to make sure that we keep this clear for for Patty. We'll do
Record.
and the record. We'll do the first variance, the second variance, and then the special exception. We'll do individual votes for each.
Well, it's one variance.
There's two variances. So the first one is 2 acres where 5 is
Oh,
required.
yes, that's right.
I wrote it down so I could remember. So that the first variance would be for 2 acres where 5 is required. The second one is the setbacks where 100 foot is
It's
required.
right.
And then the third vote will be the special exception for the
Business.
the business.
Okay.
Don't everybody jump at once.
The variances are all against kind of where the special exemptions listed out, so then with the variances approved, the special exemption will hold. Just making sure that's kind of what we're
It's
doing.
kind of like a modified special exception, because we've got some variances thrown in there.
Well, no,
Right.
that's why we're treating them separately, because the third, I mean, let's say that the other building was there. If he was to move from one to the other, he'd need the special exception.
Right, yes.
So that's the problem. Realistically, this special exception doesn't necessarily rely on the first two passing. It would be weird, but we could do that.
I think we might need to do the variance first, because under special exceptions 15.3.2.1, it says ZBA may approve a special exception only after assuring that the requested exception complies with the supplemental standards contained in this ordinance, and then including the criteria. And so since the issue for the variances is the supplemental standard 5.12, if we approve the variances, then we have made assured that the requested exception complies with the supplemental standards. If not, I don't think we have. So I do think the variances need to be addressed first.
Okay, well, that's why I put them
Then we could go
first.
forward with the special exception, and we could say it complies because of the two variances. And we'll go forward with the special exception.
Makes it easier for that.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so variance 1, 2 acres where 5 is required. Hey, Terry, procedurally, can I make the motion as the chair?
Yes, you
No?
can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I will make the motion to grant the first variance of 2 acres, whereas 5 is required. I think that the 5 criteria were very well addressed in the application, so I will say as written.
I'll second.
Second from John, so motion from the chair, second from John, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, guys, I got the ball rolling, now somebody else do the second one. Okay, the chair is making a motion that the variance for 40-foot and 65-foot side setbacks, whereas 100-foot is required, that we grant that variance. Again, I think it was very well written in the application with the five standards, so I will say as written.
Second.
Second from Davis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Special exception. Davis.
I would move that we grant the special exception to allow the business to be used in the proposed structure. As first, we have now assured that the requested exception complies with the supplemental standards through the 2 variances granted. And then per the criteria of 15.3.2.1.1 through .5, The site is in an appropriate location for such use, being consistent with the town's current master plan, as the business has existed for over 20 years. It's the choice of using the new structure is going to continue the use of the same business that has been located on this property for several decades, and that they have picked out a place that will improve both the structure, the business, the area, and they have made sure that they've complied with the other supplemental standards and the other standards not requiring the variance. The size or frequency of the use will not significantly alter the character of the neighborhood because the business already exists, because the location of the proposed structure, and also the way in which they have decided they're going to build the structure to fit within the character of the agricultural district, and to then use that to screen any commercial vehicles from view, which is required per those supplemental standards, may even enhance the character of the neighborhood with the barn-like features of the structure. The use will not create a nuisance or hazard, vehicles or pedestrians in a manner that cannot be ameliorated. As mentioned by the applicant, the business has existed as the home occupation before. They have considered all of these things with the buffers, with the location of not only the structure, but the vehicles, the housing of any equipment inside the structure, etc. The proposed location is of sufficient size to allow for adequate and appropriate facilities for the proper operation of the use. They did discuss how they are going to have the required facilities tied into the existing septic and any other facilities needed within the structure. And the proposed location is of sufficient size to allow for appropriate buffers of this use to adjacent properties. They've placed it as best they can within the property, and we have addressed the setback and size requirements within the variances.
I'll second that.
Second from Bruce. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. With that hearing is closed, so Denise, would you like to come back and chair? Resume the chair. Somebody has to open and close.
Somebody has to adjourn this meeting.
She's all rested up.
Yeah, to the now.
Well, you guys did a good job. A lot of communication. Okay, you want to talk about a joint meeting?
Of some sort for
Well,
zoning amendment?
planning, Derek, you're gonna help me with this, that they have a meeting when they discuss variances before we go to the town, correct? They have meetings?
Yeah, they generally have a workshop. I think usually they've done it in October or November,
Okay.
when they're going to discuss possible zoning amendments.
We could ask that they let us know. We could request that. They did let us know last year, and then whoever wants to attend can. I know I've attended, I don't know if it was a workshop, it was like at the end of one of their meetings, they discussed the variances. That would be the way to do it instead of having a
Right, yeah.
separate meeting.
So, obviously, the first one that comes to my mind is the multifamily definition. To clarify that, because this board struggled with it, and whatever, and there was something else that we just discussed earlier, I forget. There's some other,
Okay, so
Comes
what we
down to
can start
definition.
doing is starting to make a tally. We did
Right.
that a couple of years ago, like, you know, because sometimes the same thing comes in all the time.
right.
It was
right.
the ADU requirement to have the minimum lot size and frontage, I believe.
Yeah. And that was
that-
because our ordinance is more restrictive than the state law said, whatever it was, House Bill 544. It said, oh, you can't require ADUs to be more restrictive than if it was a single family. And we do. We say, oh, if it's an ADU, you gotta have 5 acres, blah, blah, blah. But if you had a, single family home, you don't.
But we can do that, can't we?
No, that state law said, no, we can't, not for ADUs, because that's
We
considered
can't
discriminatory,
be more strict than the state in our towns?
not for the
I
ADU.
believe the ADU, and it's been a while since I looked at the revised law, that the new ADU law basically says anywhere you allow single-family dwelling units, you must allow ADUs.
Right.
However, there is a provision in our ordinance that to have an ADU, you must meet the minimum lot size and minimum frontage.
Which we
I-
don't require for the single family,
Yes, we do.
not for a lot of record.
For a lot of record, they cannot come in and just pull a permit. They have to get a special exception to develop a non-conforming lot.
For a single family.
Yes.
Right,
So then that
right.
would apply for the
So then for the
ADU.
ADU, they'd have to go get a special exception, not to have to do the whole 5 acre. They came in for a variance and
We're
it's
getting
like,
a lot of variances for lots of record.
right,
So maybe
For
just to
ADUs.
clarify that process.
yes,
Yeah.
no, exactly.
And this is
ADUs
probably the
on-
third home occupation in a detached building that I've seen in the last 2 years, but I think it's okay that we review it because there's is this permission to have the home occupation detached, or is this permission to have this contracting service? And I feel like it's okay to review that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we just look at what's coming up a lot.
Yeah,
And
and
the
that's
third one,
exactly why
But
we.
it gives us the ability to
When the
look into
planning,
it.
the planning board does their workshop, that I've asked that, we are invited, and usually like if 2 people go, would be good.
So what was the last one about a home occupation?
Well, I just said that this is the third
Detached.
time that I've seen the detached home occupation,
Mm-hmm.
or how do we classify it? But I'm not sure if that has to be revised, just from what we've seen, because we've seen some instances of this is a home occupation, but it's just detached, and we've seen some instances of it falling under this special exemption that we've done.
And that really is probably more of a process for the town, for Jack to do what's called a zoning determination. Say, look, I'm making a zoning determination, which is appealable to the board, and I'm calling this a contractor's business. They could have then said, no, we disagree, we think it's general business. They come in here and say, he, the zoning officer, made a wrong determination, blah, blah, blah. We can reverse it, we can affirm whatever Jack did, and it clarifies the path
I don't like to
of
do
the
that.
record. Well, I think it keeps a clean record, because then it's always,
I just
But whatever.
don't, yeah, I think, you
It's a
know,
formality
we
that,
rely
yeah,
on the
takes time.
town doing what they're supposed to do, and then
Right.
we have to deal with it. I just,
it just clarifies to me from the beginning, it puts them in a box. And then there's no second guessing, it's like, no, he made his own determination, you appealed it, and you got overturned, or it was affirmed, whatever, then they can continue and say, okay, we thought it was general business, you agreed with the building inspector, go, okay, it just keeps the path a little
Right,
cleaner
yeah.
in that regards, but, not that we have to, but I think it cleans it up, but, so detached home occupations, again, it's a slippery slope, because
yeah, I'm not a
minute they
fan of
lose-
changing that.
Once
I'm
they-
Yeah, I
gonna
was
be-
gonna say.
I think we
it's
deal
come
with
up a few
them.
times, but
Yeah.
I think that
Right.
But that's
it's
just
okay.
me.
Yep.
That's just
That's
one
why I just
person's
wanted to bring it
opinion
up
on
to
it.
see if
you know?
everyone
I mean,
had it.
I think it would be good to clarify it. I mean,
Well, it is clear. You have to get a variance for it. They're trying to keep home occupations inside a home, right?
and what they should do.
You don't want your neighbor to be building their own place and running a business out of it.
Well, sometimes, I disagree, sometimes they go a step further to the home industry, which is a little broader, to say, okay, you can have the garage that's detached and the excavation business, whatever, still with the primary principle residential, but that needs to be at 5 acres, because, the noise of the, starting up the dump trucks and all that. But that's a whole separate, we don't
But
address
that's
that.
why they come here, so we can make those judgments, right?
Yeah, in some regards, right. to
That's
know
the
that
reason
need
they
to,
come for a
right.
variance. If we covered everything that people came, well, I'll tell you one thing, this book would be a lot smaller.
But, no, what I'm saying, right, but that, in that sense of, once it gets out of that and into a detached building, we now have mixed uses. They had to have a special exception in this instance, because it was a contractor's business. If it was some other use, and I don't know right now, that didn't need a special exception, that would be a multi, they need to get a variance to have those 2 principal uses, because that second one in that detached building might not be permitted in the zone. This one was by special exception tonight.
A landscape business?
yeah,
Yeah.
because of the
Just
way
by
it's classified. Like,
Right.
if it was a computer store, different problem, or a computer repair person.
Yeah, say he was doing all the repair in the garage.
I'm a leather worker. and
So
I'm
now, that was
doing stuff.
two uses, we have that service in the garage, whatever it may be, maybe he's doing cars. And then the principal use, we've got a mixed use on that lot. Mixed uses are permitted in commercial,
What's
not
it,
with the
okay.
residential.
I mean, yeah,
Well, whatever, just
yeah.
clarify, make it easy for the applicant as well as us.
Yes.
Okay, we'll deal with that in October when the planning board, we can make a list,
Yeah,
maybe in a meeting before that.
I'll draft one up, send it to.
Send it, no, we should go through it first,
Right,
and then
I'm
we'll
just
look
putting
at
these
it.
bullet
Yeah.
items, whatever, just
Okay, that sounds
we can
good.
throw it out for next meeting or whatever.
Okay,
We went through it last meeting.
Well, what?
We went through your list last meeting.
Oh, right,
Yeah, for the
Those
ADU.
two.
there was two items, one
Yeah.
was the multifamily, and then ADU, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Or existing non-conforming, I think, lots.
Derek, can you give me a good heads up on when they're gonna have that?
Yep, I'm sending
Please.
Patty and Jack and Joanne an email.
Okay, because we'll
Just-
need
yeah,
quite a bit of notice, but
Yep.
we could always just email everyone too.
I did notice in our zoning ordinance with home occupations, should be on record with the building and planning, it's in the zoning ordinance. It wasn't addressed today, but he might predate that special section of the zoning ordinance for home occupations, and it needs to be registered,
I guess you gotta look at the definition of a home occupation. That's why I sat over there.
yeah, that was under the, what was that?
What we're asking
home
for is an
occupation.
official joint meeting, because I know last year we were told, oh, you can send a delegate to this meeting, but don't send more than 3 people,
Well,
because then it would be a joint meeting.
Listen, that's a plus from when I started.
Right. Okay, I understand.
Okay, so
But I know all of us like kind of wanted to
Right.
go, and
Yeah.
then we're like,
you could, I don't see why you can't all go.
if we
Yeah, I-
plan
Anybody who wants
I
to
think
go.
that's
Derek,
always-
right? Anybody can go to a public meeting.
Correct, and that's it. It's,
So-
if there were 3 of us, we went to a public hearing or with the planning board to do some zoning activity, yeah, that might be considered, if we're gonna be voting on it. But if we're there just to input from the general public as zoning board members, I don't think we need to post that we're having a meeting, because we're not. We're participating in the planning board's meeting.
I would agree with that.
okay, so
Yeah.
just, if it's not an official joint meeting, then we just go as members of the public and
Correct.
just,
Right.
as usual,
Yeah.
disclose
Yeah.
yourself as a member or alternate.
Yeah. As well as 2 years ago, I think it was this open space, or was it last year? I forget, whatever. Just before I went off my big trip.
Yeah, that's right.
mean,
That's
we-
right, you were on that forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, if we feel that it's warranted, we could request it to be a joint meeting. There's nothing that says we couldn't, I'm aware of.
yeah, just.
If it's officially a joint meeting, would you need the quorum of both sides in order to vote on
Yes.
anything?
Yes.
I would prefer planning board just have it like a workshop personally, some sort of asking for input
Yeah,
from
I think
us.
that's why they tried to limit it, but
Yeah.
if some of us just say, no, we're just a member of the public
We
today.
can also make a list and give that to them prior to the meeting.
Yeah. and
Because a
just do it as
lot of the
correspondence,
things they
right.
discuss come from the town,
And just do it as correspondence. Right.
Yes,
Right,
so,
they come from staff.
yeah.
A lot of the applications, like the ones you see tonight, when it's in a gray area.
and they're the authors technically of the zoning ordinance, we just interpret it. So we're asking a question, hey, we'd like
Correct.
to clarify this so the interpretation's better for us and the
Yes,
applicants.
and that's
Right.
that's a good point. That's
Right.
definitely, because we are
Right,
stuck with
we're at
what
the
they
end.
give us.
Yeah, we're the
Right.
tail that's
And
wagging.
interpreting it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's good,
Good.
thank you.
To add that 5.12 to the list.
Right.
Those are the letters that, for that last hearing, that they submitted.
They submitted.
Record.
Oh,
We have to
yeah.
make sure
Implement
that
some
we get-
abutters, of positive abutter
Yeah, okay, great.
letters.
Do you have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Motion.
Have a good night.